So TLDR for conversation today is wanted to give a little bit more of an overview about the process for the elections, and as part of that, provide a little bit more detail about those four high-level goals that we're hoping to accomplish in term two. And basically after that, just give you guys a chance to ask questions about the election process, or if you had some portion of a potential campaign you were thinking about running that you wanted to pitch and get some feedback on. It's sort of open format, after the intro. So yeah, we'll start inviting people up in a bit. So I think actually in the event description here, yeah, that leads to the forum post, and within that forum post, there's also a link to the community memo, kind of in one of the bottom paragraphs there. And on the second page of the memo are these four goals for next year. And I'll just read them out real quick, the headline, and then provide a little bit more context. So one is emphasize partnerships in biz dev. Two is broaden community activation. Three is support parallel. And four is to strive for greater decentralization. That's not to say that everything we do next year will be captured by these four goals, but this was our attempt at summarizing a majority of what we plan to focus on next year. And something that actually came up in a meeting today was this concept of emphasizing partnerships and business development. I think really will be a big focus in year two. And that means onboarding other games. I guess, yeah, in the short form, that's what that means. They're sort of competing. Well, I shouldn't say competing, but they're different frameworks of how to approach that, and what types of games we want to partner with, what stage along their development. But I do think that will be a big area of focus and opportunity for growth for us next year. And broaden community activation, high level, is that we want to start to provide mini grants, essentially, like bounties, to enable people to participate in the ecosystem and kind of get some rewards from accomplishing various tasks, whether it's like content creation or there's a variety of things, and we'll get into more details about that, but could definitely use some help in figuring out more ways to activate the community. Support the launch of Parallel is probably somewhat self-explanatory. Like, what can we do to provide the most seamless economic infrastructure to power the Prime ecosystem that can live in harmony with the game as it launches and goes throughout the various phases of early access. And finally, the greater decentralization. Can kind of just think about that as Echelon trying to stand more on its own 2 feet, and yeah, just be more of a self-starting ecosystem and create new Echelon specific value streams and stuff like that. So I will pause there. I don't know if any of the other EPs want to provide some more comments here.
No, that was a great summary.
Pen 4. So yeah, with that said, obviously I've seen a few people already kind of officially raise their hands, say they want to run for EP. Some people who are kind of thinking about it, and I do see some of those names in here. I've had a few conversations with people sort of in DMs and who were curious about various aspects of Echelon, and so we really just wanted to provide this opportunity for you guys, if you have questions about really anything that has to do with being an EP or thinking about running a campaign, we are all ears. So feel free to raise your hands with questions, comments, whatever it may be.
I guess we got some shy folks here. Maybe just to sort of fill in the air before we get some hands up. Maybe we can provide a bit more information on the OJ Cruise ready to go. A bit of context. We're still sort of flushing it out, but these sort of panels that we're planning to do. So as an overview for the sort of like the timeline of events regarding the elections is by the end of February. In the last week of February, we'll be starting to receive nominations, and then so that's when you'll be requested to put your name forward, fill out the sort of requisite information on the forum, and then we'll be dividing the nomination or the nominees into sort of groups, and we'll be doing these sort of panels. So splitting them up. We don't know how that's going to be sorted out quite yet, but we'll in the first week we'll have one round of panels where we'll ask individual panel cohorts a few questions more group related. And obviously, we'll send those questions out prior, and then the following week we'll do another round. We'll mix up the groups, and right now what we're thinking is requesting that the panelists or the nominees ask questions of each other, just to sort of get more discussion going between the EPs, as opposed to having sort of individualized questions per each nominee. And that's how we would imagine like the two panels running, and then we would go into votes. So that's just sort of how we're thinking about it. Obviously, we will provide more detailed sort of framework once we've finalized it, but that's what we're thinking right now. So I think I've seen some people now raising their hands. So yeah.
Yeah, I'll just add real quick before we get into the questions is because I've received this question from a couple of people. Who qualifies for the panels? And the answer is that this year, everybody who applies is going to qualify. So there's no pre-screening process or elimination period. Everybody who submits an application, which basically means that you've made a post on the forum within that week, will qualify and be scheduled for both panels. But yeah, I think who came up? I think J. Crew, you were the first person to put a hand up. So
sure, thank you. Thanks for hosting this call, and appreciate the write-up you guys did on each EP's duties on the council. It's I can say that, and I think I speak for everybody, but it was a little bit difficult to understand what everybody did. So that write-up was pretty good. And it's a good segue into my question. So what do you guys think are your weak points? Like if you were to pick the perfect candidate, like what skill sets would they have, or what areas would they cover?
I guess
I
go
can
ahead, Meta.
I can try. I mean, I don't know if there's a perfect candidate, right? I think that there are certain qualities that I think do well. I think Cold had alluded to a couple of those things. One being like a self-starter, someone that's like motivated. Obviously, considering like the balance of the ecosystem is quite important. I know we all have our own sort of biases, but I think when we do have our meetings, we come to the table and we're really trying to think about how to move this thing forward, and work together. I think like it's really important that like a cohort of EPs can because it sometimes it does take a long time to get consensus and achieve direction. It takes multiple conversations, but like I think just sort of speaking on sort of looking back at what sort of my experience from this is we've been able to be very work very well together, and I think that's like for me like a pretty important thing is like being able to listen to everyone else at the table, figuring out what is the sort of key takeaways that the broader ecosystem needs to move forward and sort of push those objectives. So yeah, I rambled a bit, but like I think for me, being a self-starter, being passionate about the community, and sort of being I guess willing to discuss and find consensus.
Yeah, I'll jump in here real quick as well. I would say like I think it's easy to think like, oh, okay, like maybe we need somebody who is really good with Photoshop, can like do design or Illustrator or the Adobe Suite, or we need somebody that has like XYZ experience, building websites. And while I think that like those skills can be transferable, it's also important to like think about the fact that like as Echelon grows, it's important that the organization actually like builds out its sort of like Rolodex of service providers to fulfill certain obligations. Like there's nothing wrong with having a service agreement with a designer we really like working with that can do design, that can like create assets for us, rather than hoping that somebody with those skills kind of is persistently an EP. It's sort of like it's not necessarily the same as like, hey, we're a startup and we need to fulfill like these job functions, so we're going to go out and we're going to hire for them, because like at the end of the day, like we're not really hiring. Like EPs aren't hired, they're elected, and like the terms are only guaranteed for a year. So like maybe to like bring this back into something a bit more like tactical, like I do have a very specific skill. I've spent my entire career writing software, everything from like web applications to DevOps and backend systems, but like I don't build the website for Echelon. What this does translate into as part of my role as EP is I have a high degree of technical literacy, and so I can speak with the EPs about things that we want and things that we need, and translate those into like product documents and communicate with our service providers who are actually going to like build software to make sure that kind of like what we actually want is effectively communicated. So I do think like specific skills that people have that are a bit more, I think, like tactical, like I know how to do design, I know how to do software, I know how to do metalworking, I don't know, whatever it is. Like those skills can be transferable in more abstract ways, rather than we're looking to have an EP that specifically fills a need that in sort of like the bigger picture view of the foundation would be better served by having a sort of, a collection of service providers that we like working with that we can sort of pull in for different projects. Does that sort of help clarify things, or does that make sense to you, J. Crew?
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So it sounds like then like the council is pretty mature with what functions people handle on the day-to-day, like scribing, for example, scribing like meeting notes, things like that. So I guess maybe just to one more question, because I want to give the other people up here a chance to ask theirs. But so what areas of focus, like what do you guys deem the most high priority as areas of focus?
Yeah, I think it goes back to these 4 goals we outlined in the memo. And arguably among those goals, this concept of partnerships and business development is pretty high up on the priorities list. I think getting feelers out there throughout the ecosystem of not just Web3 gaming titles, but also indie developer studios, companies that might be builders and working really hard towards an objective from a gameplay perspective, but don't really have the knowledge or expertise to plug in or to build their own Web3 ecosystem. Those are kind of examples of projects that might be a good fit within the Prime ecosystem because they sort of have the game development portion covered, and we can cover them on the Web3 ecosystem. So I think that goal could arguably be championed by one or two or three EPs in the next term that just really focus on that from a research perspective, and also planning and kind of just taking over that segment of activity. But I think any candidate who looks at these four goals and thinks of a way, whether directly or indirectly, you can carve out a niche and kind of help to contribute to any of those, I think that's a pretty strong platform upon which to build a campaign.
Thanks. That's great. Yeah, I'll pass it on to Wow or Nane now.
Afternoon, everybody. Wow here. EPs, thanks for pulling this together. Honestly, I don't have a question. I know I've actually reached out personally, talked to a couple of different people with questions I did have early on. So I'm not going to tip my hat to, the things that I'm leaning into on my platform here. But I just wanted to say, kudos to everybody who's thrown their name in the hat. It's one thing to go on Discord and interact with everybody every day. It's another thing to really put yourself out there. And, I've been really doing a lot of thinking about this whole campaign over the last few weeks as I put it together. And, kudos to everybody that's going along on this journey with essentially me, right? And whether I make it or not, that's, to be determined. But it's been very introspective over my career within crypto, right? And so I just wanted to say thank you. I am not shy, so I wanted to raise my hand to make sure that was well known. And thanks to everybody. That's it.
It's awesome. Positive. Yeah,
Right on.
it is true. It is a responsibility, right? And I think there's a lot to do in the coming year. I would say, just again to echo some of what Cold mentioned earlier, is I think like we're coming out of the stage of like infancy, or it's moving past being nascent as a concept being materialized. We're moving into the community's vote to unlock. We're definitely very close to the alpha release. And so I think we're now looking at it saying, where do we grow from here rather than how do we build the pieces we need? So I would try to focus on some of that if you're going to kind of be running it as an EP, and also make sure you're a part of the community, right? Like I think a lot of us know J.Crew and Wowsage Coin and others that are active in the community and want to see it succeed long term. I think that'll add a lot of confidence to the vote. Even if your platform's not perfect, people will be like, yeah, that person understands the community because they're there, and not just on the Parallel side, but on the Echelon side, and would probably be a good champion to connect with other people in the ecosystem or outside of the ecosystem and say, hey, this is Prime. This is what it can do for your ecosystem. Here's how we'd like to work with you. And not just make those offers, but have that kind of collect the information about what's working or not working for other participants, and kind of come up with creative new ways of engaging with other games to essentially make Prime pan game, beyond just Parallel, and there are a couple things that are coming that will do that irrespective. I know there's been some developments that I'm sure will come out shortly around other stuff that will utilize Prime, but I think that will really be the goal, is just building additional utility by partnering with other really fun games. I would focus there personally.
I think one thing we haven't really touched on yet too that's important to call out here is, you know, how much time goes into this role, because you know, anybody that's planning to, you know, run and wants to be part of this, you know, I definitely consider like, hey, like we meet pretty frequently, you know, there's a lot of, you know, work and a lot of yeah, just make sure you have the sufficient amount of time to do this. Otherwise, it's, you know, you're gonna be stressing yourself out, and it wouldn't be good both ways.
Yeah, I'd echo that for sure. It's a lot. There's a lot to process, a lot to get up to speed on, and then a lot to do.
Yeah, I
Totally.
can.
Yeah, for
maybe,
some of us, it's basically our full-time job. Not for everybody. And some people are better at balancing lots of things at once than others. But at least for me, this is what I do.
I can provide some detail as to like what is how much. So we typically meet at least 3 times a week: Mondays, Wednesdays, Thursdays. But within those are sort of the general meetings, and then we've got sort of breakout working group meetings intermittently between the week. And we sometimes we're getting better at it, but early on in the when we had a ton on our plate, we were taking a lot of meetings on the weekends. But yeah, you're basically at least locked in for 3 meetings a week, and then whichever working group you're a part of or you're interested in participating in, we'll likely meet like 3 or 4 more times. Then there's just sort of offshoot huddles. So it is a commitment. I don't think that I don't think it's something that you know you can take lightly.
Yeah, I would also say like be prepared to function, self-directed at times, but also in an environment that can be slightly ambiguous, right? Like we don't always know the answers; it's not always clear, and so you're trying to make the best decisions you possibly can as a collective. I think that's something worth mentioning. So if you don't function well with, not always having a very clear path to the objective, knowing the objective is one thing, but finding the path to the objective is a bit of a exploratory exercise rather than, using a map that guides you directly there.
Yeah,
I totally agree. And I was just say real quick that.
Yeah, you go ahead.
Sorry, Bu. Yeah, I totally agree with what Kalo said, and I've written this a couple times in some of the previous posts, but nobody really is going to tell you what to do when you become EP. It's not like you get, you come on to the meetings and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, here's an XYZ task list. Obviously, if you're a new EP, like we're going to help give guidance and sort of get you up to speed, but definitely this notion of being able to carve your own path and be a self-starter. And in a moment where you have free time or kind of a day off, like figuring out ways on your own that you can be valuable to the team here, I think it is really important skill.
Yeah, and on the ambiguity, I typed this in the chat, but I guess I'll just say it for folks listening as well. It's like everybody who's here understands the pace at which crypto changes. And as an individual, making individual choices that kind of only impact you, it's a lot different than when you're making choices that impact a lot of people. And that's where like sort of like being able to be adaptable and adjust your sort of points of view as facts on the ground change is really crucial. I mean, just think about 2022 in general and how much things changed from kind of like the macro perspective of crypto and where it is and where it's going. If you're somebody that like generally struggles with moving past an idea, then I think that this might it might be challenging to you to do this role, because like things change all the time, and they're often it's things that like we have no control over. It's like you just have to choose. It's like, okay, now we live in this world. So of the things we can control, how can we react to this or not? And be willing to sort of like let things go, even if they were good ideas or you felt really good about them. And it, it sucks and it's a challenge, but you also have to think, it's like thinking about something about my own individual risk tolerance or my own individual preferences. It's sort of what's the sort of risk tolerance or how does this impact a foundation or something that I want to, exist and thrive well past the point in time in which I'm involved in it.
I got another follow-up question. So it sounds like the day-to-day work is very much like working in a DAO. For myself, when I went full-time, at first it felt like less work, but then I quickly realized that suddenly I was taking meetings 6 a.m. in the morning, 8 o'clock at night, just to adjust for people's time zones and to just for, like you said, the changes in the market and the changes in crypto and the tech. So I guess what my question is how do you do you guys have a peer review process? If somebody were to jump into this role and get elected and they realized, whoa, like I can't handle this, or I'm not used to working in this way, I need like a manager or something like that, and they were performing poorly, like is there a process for kind of reviewing people and giving them feedback to maybe improve, or worst case scenario, like voting them out or something like that?
Yeah, so these are some of the things we did implement as we in the first year here. So we did create peer review processes. If you feel like you probably need a manager, I think this might be a difficult role, but I think there are, the good news is there are carry forward EPs that can help. If you feel like you're not sure where to be placing your effort or what the priority is, I think you can ask. Generally speaking, we try to provide feedback to each other in a constructive way. If something's like totally off, or we say like, let's park it and let's say, revisit this because the priority is X, Y, or Z. So I think there's a lot of collaboration that'll help guide you, but there's no real managerial structure to it. It's just all of us working collectively and agreeing that, the priority is X. There are some different time zones. I know Sentiens is not in the same time zone as myself, as an example. Know that going in, and that that you should probably be prepared to tailor to the majority, whatever your schedule is. That way, you're a lot of times it feels often like you're really just you're trying your very best to form consensus on almost everything as a collective. And that includes, if the majority of people are in for, I'm just going to pick a random example, Singapore, then you probably, and you're the minority, you probably want to figure out how to make that work for the majority, so that you're not impeding the progress that's happening. But I think there is obviously prescribed, not prescribed, but general consensus around what we think the priorities are. I think stacking up and kind of pointing back to that North Star is always a healthy habit. And then if there's something that you're working on that you do want to take to like a managerial figure, not that these people are managers, but they're people with experience from the prior term that can help you navigate it, or say, actually, maybe it's not as important as you think, and maybe here's a new way of doing it, or here's how we did something that, similar in the past. So I think that'll be accessible to everyone who is a new EP. So you're not going to be like fed to the wolves left for yourselves, but you will have support from each other. And you just all you have to do is tap your teammates and your fellow EPs on the shoulder and say, hey, I'm really struggling with this. Like, I'm like, a good example is I'm notoriously not great with spreadsheets, and I'll turn to Bu, Meta, or Fall and say, hey, can you guys run this, because this is not my bag of tricks, and immediately they'll always pick up the piece and say, yeah, I got this, don't worry about it. And so I think you want to figure out as quickly as possible what your strength is, and also figure out what your weakness is. Fill the gap with your teammates on the weakness and focus on your strength so that you can create as much value for the foundation and the network of token participants as possible. That's kind of how I would try to approach it. And I hope I'm answering your question.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, I would actually just add, I think that was a great summary, Kalos. And on the spreadsheet thing, actually, I feel like Sarge is our ultimate spreadsheeter in times
Yeah,
of need.
Sarge is massive on spreadsheets. I'm just picking random people that are on the list.
No, but I think I would also say, like, in terms, because you asked also about the kind of peer review process, and that's something that's definitely been evolving. You guys all saw, I think it was a couple recaps ago, we posted the results of the internal survey. And going forward, we are going to be moving to a quarterly model for that. So at the very least, we'll all know how we're being perceived by our peers. I think that, and that says a lot, right? Like if you get a low score, you might say, like, I thought I was doing a good job, but my peers say, hey, maybe I'm not doing so good of a job, and you can kind of go and seek feedback. And we're also kind of thinking about ways to potentially build in maybe like an automatic suspension or for a month, say, if you're below a certain threshold, to kind of like take the personal biases we have out of it and make it somewhat more automated. So there is some thinking still to be done around optimizing those systems. But yeah, it's definitely something that we have thought about.
Yeah, and just to add to that even more, I think like essentially the basic controls and protection measures are established. I believe, Meta, correct me if I'm wrong, but some of them were put into the charter. Am I wrong?
Sorry, what was put in the charter?
Just some of the items around, because one of the questions that came up from JCrew was around like suspension of an EP or removal of an EP.
Yeah, the high level stuff is in there. I think it's more about like drilling down. What I mean is like just kind of breaking it down into more actionable steps, I think is potentially somewhere we could improve a bit. But yeah, you are right that a lot of that has been written out in the charter.
Yeah, the first thing we try to do is to put rules in to govern ourselves, and a charter around like just expectations around what we are supposed to do or not supposed to do and why, and then how to put risk measures in place to prevent us from abusing power in any capacity. When I say us, I mean any elected EP, any cohort of elected EPs as individuals and or as a group, just to protect the foundation from some sort of internal attack as people come and go. So I think we put the foundation in place, but if someone, and if the next cohort of EP says, hey, like, I really want to focus actually myself on literally that, like building out further constructs specifically around protecting the foundation, or the governance structures, like that could be a capacity in which, might be valuable to the foundation long term. So I think, there's a lot of ways to add value here. I think obviously the things that are most valuable are less focused inward, like these types of rule, protection mechanisms, although they're critically important. More external focus of growth of the network, growth of the utility associated with Prime would likely be the focal point, given a lot of the systems are going to be online for the first time. So.
Well, Nain, you have been up here for a minute now. Did you have a question, comment, concern?
Hey, yeah, no, thanks. I actually came with a lot of questions which have been mostly answered. For example, about the outsourcing, working with service providers. I also wanted to ask about perhaps potentially a list of things you guys would want to share as things you wish you knew before you became EPs. I think some of that has been touched upon. I'll ask one more question. Is that so? Is there an informal hierarchy simply based on the roles, on account of the roles that you guys have? And I ask this in the sense that I understand that they're day-to-day tasks, but I also was wondering how strategic directional goals are generated in the team overall. Like, how does that work? And maybe if you guys have any examples of how it was done in the past, in the sense that, like broader directional goals, how are they generated? How are they laid out in terms of a roadmap or milestones for those? How are they laid out? Is it under the ambit of somebody who's experienced in that specific domain, or how does it typically work?
Maybe I can try to start the answer on this one, and others can please correct me if I'm wrong here. But like, I think because of the nature of the first phase or the first term of EPs, a lot of the priorities ended up being, not related to parallel, but somewhat correlated, because like that's the first instance of being alive, and like that kind of breathes life into the utility of Prime for the first time. So I think some of the priorities came from there, and some of the priorities came from just collective discussion around risks and protection measures or foundational components we wanted to put in place, thinking ahead that maybe we may not be here next term. So really, it came down to like, how do we leave this place better than we left it? And the first step was put rules in place to protect against ourselves and others. And then the second piece was make progress towards the community's goals around transferability, as well as the utility goals around use within an ecosystem. I think we're coming out of that a little bit in the next term, in that, obviously the transferability vote has already passed, which is awesome. And then the utility is going to, more and more coming online. Obviously, there's already non-transferable utility and payload and artographs. There's more coming that, post the March event of Unlock, and in particular with the release of the game on the parallel side. So I think now that we're kind of moving past that, I think the priorities are really set at the re-election phase of, people acknowledging where they are, where the ecosystem is from Prime standpoint today, upon the new EPs taking their seats, and saying, okay, we know this is going to happen. I mean, Parallel will always brief on our side where we see ourselves going. So, where we're going, and then, the question is where does the Echelon Foundation and Prime want to go? Seeing where we're going, where does it want to go beyond that, and kind of establishing a consensus around what should happen next amongst the EPs is probably the step that would occur. I wouldn't say that there's definitely, there isn't a hierarchy. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong here, Cold, or Ultra, or Meta, you're welcome to stop me here. I don't think there's a hierarchy among us.
I certainly don't feel like there's a hierarchy here. I mean, I think that's just part of like what it takes to be an EP is like you really have to be able to work. I know it's like standard, but you really have to be able to work well with others, and you have to be able to compromise at times.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
And,
more of a
Otherwise, you don't get
partnership.
anything done.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Bu.
It's a partnership. It's like different people. Like, is there a hierarchy? There might be an implicit hierarchy in certain areas of expertise, right? Like when Kalos is talking about things on the gaming side that may impact the ecosystem, his words are gonna inherently carry more weight because he's viewed as a domain expert on that. Similarly, if we're talking about something legal, then Paul or maybe myself, if I've been on these calls, people, our opinion and our view might have a bit more weight because we're the ones that have spent the time having those conversations. So I think, there are certainly domain experts, but no one's the boss. And I think like any effective organization, you sort of trust the domain experts to disseminate the relevant information, and explain it in such a way that people who either weren't there or maybe don't have that expertise still feel equipped to sort of, form an opinion and have a conversation and participate.
Something I'd like to add to that as well is we have found a lot of success in breaking out into working groups around certain disciplines and concerns within Echelon. And generally, those working groups will come amongst one another and have a bunch of meetings to discuss the particular concern that we're working on, and then propose their findings to the group as a whole. And then generally, we will vote in terms of whether we want to proceed with something or not internally. So it's even within this whole concept of hierarchies, it's more so that we take all these domain experts and they work together to find the best collective solution, and then we work with the rest of the EPs to move forward.
Yeah, and I think to kind of come back to the questions Nain was asking, one of them was around roadmap. I think like the roadmap should be revisited as the new seats are taken. So any priorities set by the initial kind of carryover EPs, I think that there should be probably a conversation around what the new EPs see as the priority, mapping against what the existing EPs see as the priority, and finding a consensus there. And some of the stuff might be added to scope and some of them might be removed from scope based on that conversation. So I think it's a collective activity, but you're not going in without a framework because the existing EPs kind of have their own understanding of what they think should happen next. And then making sure we don't miss part of the question, let's go back to, you asked, is there anything that you wish you would have known prior to going into this as an EP that you can share with the group? And I'll let the others maybe take that question, but I think we missed that part of it.
I wish I knew how hard it was going to be to hold back all of the alpha, all of the delicious gameplay screenshots and other little treats that we get snuck into us every once in a while. It's hard. You must be a person of very strong will.
Yeah, one thing on that is all the EPs have like a constant flow. It's like drinking through a fire hose of the game teams sharing where we're going and what we're doing, just so that you have line of sight as an EP on a lot of different stuff that's happening. So be prepared to have tight lips about what you see. Go ahead, Bu.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I've spent most of my career in startups. I've built companies before. Like, I'm not, this world isn't necessarily foreign, but I haven't really worked this closely on an entity or organization in such a, what's the best way to phrase this? With I guess like with this much, with this many question marks sort of at a macro level, and by that I mean sort of like politically and legally, and just being able to sort of understand the nuances of kind of, we're all crypto natives, we all get it in here, but being able to think about things like someone who isn't, or who is, maybe views this as a negative and not a positive, and read the tea leaves on where the puck might be going to, skate to where the puck is going on some of these things, and think defensively as well, is, I think I didn't have a big enough appreciation for that. Now, okay, some of that is hindsight because, we had 3 massive explosions in our space last year, and that obviously increased scrutiny. But I think it's one thing to like be in crypto and understand that there's a bunch of noise around, bills and policymakers and the politics of it and everything, and it's another thing to then be working on an organization that is inherently going to be subject to some amount of scrutiny because of that, and sort of how that changes the way that you approach things and think about things and try to manage risk.
Anyone else have something that they want to share around an unexpected maybe part of their experience that they didn't see before they took the opportunity?
I would say, like I guess, yeah, the discussions they take time. So you think that like certain things are quite obvious, You know, like we probably all have like different ideas of how things should go, but like I think for me, like some of the learning processes or things I learned was just like working with everyone. I mean, again, like everyone that that was part of this cohort, like I felt like I could get along with really, really well. And even then, it still took you know, sometimes a while to reach like consensus or a decision because you're trying to balance everything. You're trying to make sure like you second guessing yourself is good. Sometimes it can get, you know, lengthy, but I think for me it was like how long, like you get 11 individuals in a room, you know, you're not all going to agree even if you like the person. Like it just takes a bit of time. So that for me was like decisions do take a bit longer than normal. I mean, in previous roles where you know, I was I was an associate at an architecture office, so you know, I had a bit more pull, and like things just sort of went the way that need to go in terms of getting a project going. But with this, there's no sort of, sometimes there's no real roadmap. Sometimes like the approach is different. So it takes a while to get everyone on the same page. And yeah, I think that like adaptability is for sure something that is a strong trait or quality that that would serve well.
Right. Thank you. No, very insightful answers. I had a few other questions as well, but I see Rarity's here as well, so I'll pass it on to him. And if we have time, I'll ask again later. Thank you so much.
I guess it's my turn. First off, name. So it's been a while since we've chatted, so nice to hang out again. Yeah, so hey everyone, thanks for inviting me up. I know the EP job can sometimes be a bit thankless, but I do want to take a moment and just say I appreciate all you guys are doing here. I think one sentiment that I've kind of seen, and it might generally be chalked up to comm strategy or how sometimes EP updates were delivered. But from a first-hand perspective, like it felt like sometimes the previous term of EPs felt a bit homogeneous. How can we ensure that this time around during elections that we index towards inviting diverse and more varied perspectives into the room? It's just my perspective at this point in time that at this kind of point in the foundation's infancy, having a diverse and varied set of perspectives in the room can be invaluable.
I just want to hop in here with one quick note, and it's that despite our community-facing communications coming out with a single voice, there are many debates and discussions that we have before we have a community-facing statement. So while it may appear to be quite all is one from the outside, I would say that from the inside, I don't share that particular view.
Yeah, you said exactly what I was going to say, Fall. Which is, yeah, you know, what's communicated externally is often the work of, as Meta sort of alluded to in his previous answer, it's like a lot of time and conversations with folks getting consensus around the direction we ultimately want to go. And so, yeah, I can definitely see how if you're not like in the meetings, or you know, if you're just reading our communications, and that's partially our own fault for sort of like what gets out there and what doesn't, it's easy to see that as like kind of everybody agreeing. But I would say like my experience through year one was like not like that. I wouldn't say that like everybody agreed internally, and there was a lot of debate on, you know, great many things in terms of like direction and a diversity of opinions in terms of, you know, representation and how to balance things.
I'll just add one more thing real quick. I totally agree with what you guys both just said, and it's arguably more of a testament to kind of that soft skill of teamwork and the ability to compromise than it is that there wasn't a diversity of opinions. That said, we in the future might reach a point where there is something that we can't reach consensus on. And over time, that may start to be the case more regularly, depending on the types of decisions that are being made. And in that case, we have the EP NFTs and we have Snapshot for a reason, and that is to be the final determinant of sentiment and the way that a decision goes. So although it didn't happen this year, there could be a scenario in the future where it's whatever the decision point may be. We actually do have to lean on those structures that we built into the charter, like the rule of three, for example, and employ those in order to reach a final decision. But yeah, we have been able to reach compromises this year and work really well together as a team.
And anytime that somebody did like really have a really varied opinion on something, we always worked well together to really hear out that person and try to understand why they thought, differently versus the majority. And yeah, I don't know, just it worked well.
Yeah, we've definitely had at it for sure. We've definitely had at it together on certain things where, but again, I think we always ultimately want to come back to like what's best for the ecosystem. Should, produce a unified decision as best as humanly possible. But I think like also one of the things to think about is really like the diversification of the voting base as a result of the decisions now being, originating from an EP election, starting from PKs, moving now to kind of a further greater distribution across Prime itself. And I think if you feel that something is, topical that needs to be championed, really using that message in your campaign to garner support from a more broad distribution of voting potential and voting power is becoming more and more possible. And that's a great indicator because essentially it means that it's becoming further, more and more decentralized in how decisions are made as a community. So I think putting those things forward, if there is a desire for, maybe some other type of person to be elected to the foundation, I think what you're really looking for is the opportunity to communicate that clearly, connect with voting power in a meaningful way, and garner support to drive that forward. So I think that's becoming, that power is being diluted, which is good because essentially it just furthers the decentralization of the community's ability to make decisions. So, but I think you'll definitely observe from the outside that we're all hunky dory and kumbaya around decisions, but there's a lot of back and forth, and sometimes decisions get quite heated because someone believes one way is the best way and someone believes the other way is the best way. But the good news is that typically it always resolves on what's best for the majority, and the group is really where we want to be as a united front.
Thanks for the complete answers. I think there's room to expose a little bit more of the incremental thought, though I know some of the subjects are, let's call them, very sensitive, and so that can't always be accomplished. But thank you for expanding on that. That was a helpful answer.
Our pleasure.
So,
do you have any other questions, or did you want us to move on to maybe Mac 10 or?
No, feel free to move on.
Yeah, just want to draw our attention real quick to the time. We don't necessarily have to call it here in a couple minutes. I think the the Ready Player DAO thing over at Parallel starts in a couple minutes, so I imagine a few people want to hop over to that. So I'm happy to stay and run over the hour another 10-15 minutes.
I want to hear what Mac 10 has to say, maybe.
Yeah, no, totally.
Sure. I joined in a little bit late, but it was just more upon, like, you mentioned about organizations maybe applying for an EP. And so, like, let's say J. Crew became an EP. Now he's kind of technically representing a PDAO. Like, would we have it so that, like, PDAO would kind of be able to apply and then have that representative? And then I guess on that other side, how do we avoid kind of them pushing their own agendas? And at what point does like the EPs push things to like community votes as well? And that's kind of like where does the community input come into some of these decisions? Obviously, some of them need to be more hush hush due to alpha and whatnot, but yeah, that's
Sure.
kind of my
Yeah,
question.
so on the second one, I'll start on the second one first. On the second one, there are indecision points at which we have to turn to the community, or I believe there's like tiering system that the EPs have created to decide what goes to community and what stays within the EP voting power. Really, if there's enough contention, then the vote gets pushed to community if we really can't find consensus. But what that's supposed to do is to remove, as much as humanly possible, like voter fatigue. And so, but I'm sure one of the EPs can comment kind of on that further. On the organizational side, I think there are limitations we've put in place in the charter, and maybe Meta or Bu can correct me here. I believe we put limitations on any one organization's representation within Echelon limited to a certain number of seats, including like parallel. Is that fair, Meta? I can't remember.
It was three.
Yeah, it's limited to 3. And that's just sort of like associations. I think and this is sort of what what I believe is like, you know, even what your associations aside, like once you become an EP, like Echelon sort of comes first. I know that there's like some certain biases can't be it's tough sometimes, but like I do believe that you know, regardless of your affiliations, if you're an EP, it becomes more important.
Yeah, your function becomes to serve the the mandate of Prime, but I think also the community itself, right? And so it'll be a pretty big conflict of interest, I think, if you find yourself feeling at some point like you have to serve some auxiliary interest, because everyone has cards or some holdings in something, and they all park that for the mandate of the betterment of Prime itself and the furtherment, of the ecosystem. I think you're going to find yourself pretty quickly at conflict if you feel like you're there to push some external mandate on Echelon. I think that would be really hard. And just to be clear, I'm not saying that that's the case for PETA or anyone else, but there are restrictions put on the number of representatives from any one organization to avoid an attack structure whereby any external organization could try to take over the foundation with a majority voting power. But I think so we have to assume good intent and work together collectively, and you have to work with your peers. And if your peers don't share a sentiment around something that you're bringing in as from the outside affiliation as a mandate, you're going to probably be met with facing that down as a group and saying, yeah, that's not what we're here to do, or so it's a conflict, but it's a conflict that every one of us has, and we just park at the door to do the best we can for Prime and for the ecosystem.
Can I jump in quickly?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, sure.
So thanks for bringing that up, Mac. I was actually going to ask the same question, right? Like, so how, if somebody is joining, the council that governs Prime, how do we ensure that there's no conflicts of interest, or rather, how do we mitigate situations where there could be influence or maybe even, monetary gain from certain information? So one of the questions I asked, not here, but in the channel was, is there an NDA being signed, right? Like, because there's a lot of power in the position and, power in the information, right? Like, how do we restrict or at least mitigate some of that stuff? And I can definitely see that as being a problem. But to echo what Kalos had said, it's ultimately up to like how the community sees the person and how the community trusts the person to act in the best interests of Prime.
Yeah, I believe there are, correct me if I'm wrong again, I don't remember because it's been a while, but I believe there are NDAs, right, Meta?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are NDAs.
We have training. we have like trading lockups on any events. Like there's all kinds of stuff that gets implemented to protect the community from any unfavorable action on behalf of the EP. Right, Meta?
Yeah. So yeah, we have NDAs. We have sort of trade banning, trade rules, and then we've recently beefed up to include prime trading when it becomes transferable. So there are sort of those types of more, I guess, like detailed things that sort of help sort of protect that. But then in terms of, I guess, like operationally, like I think just because like the way that the council works is like it's very much consensus driven that I think like I guess like a hostile takeover is I think that's sort of I think it would be very difficult, right? Like I think we're like everyone that's on the council is like really trying to weigh out all different viewpoints. We have a wide range of collectors, a wide range of sort of sort of knowledge in terms of where we are in sort of our let's say crypto careers. So but everyone's valid, right? Like just because someone doesn't hold as much assets or is new to crypto, like that doesn't mean that their viewpoints aren't heard. And on the flip side, like there are obviously some EPs that hold sizable positions in certain assets, and and they definitely sort of represent those views. But I think the ultimate thing is like, it just the group won't function if there is sort of like I guess hostile takeover, just because we we are working for a balanced and sort of unified approach forward.
Yeah, I'd also say that, sorry, Mac, I see you wanting to raise your hand here on this, but I just want to make sure this is clear. I think like, there are a lot of, teams that have formed, DAOs, people who've contributed to the ecosystem in terms of code. And I think everyone comes to the table with their own interest. So I don't think a DAO is necessarily any different other than the scale of exposure to something than any one of us or anyone else who's contributed to the ecosystem. And what we want to do is not preclude anyone from participating, but just put controls in place to protect against any organization being able to have overwhelming control of the foundation, but still allow everyone representation. That's the goal, I think. And that includes Parallel as a studio, right? Like there is no privileged, preference to us or anyone else. And just that way, again, it enforces a rule set that protects the mandate of decentralization and protects, ensures that the community has representation that has their best interest in mind. And maybe there's a refinement required there in longer term, but that's just my take on it. Did you have another thing you wanted to say, Mac?
No, I mean, it's just more, I really appreciate you guys touched base pretty much on all of it. I think the main point is coming from is like, and it's been touched on, is that idea of like things are like how much the community has input. But I think you kind of touched on that when you kind of were saying, well, it originally started out as PK holders. Now we're going to be moving to Prime, and kind of at what point does those decisions kind of take the input from the community without getting that voters fatigue, right? So really appreciate it. But yeah, that was kind of the main point. I don't think people are hijacking, but I think there is these like areas of conflict, right? Like we want to see your tax returns, we want to see your wallets, things like that. There are like areas, and I like to get insight on how you guys have thought about it and what you've done to protect it. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem. I think maybe one of the EPs who worked on the tiering structure around governance and decision making, which we all had a lot of discussion on, can probably comment a bit more around when things get pushed to community and when things stay in EP hands.
Yeah, so we reworked the system through a few iterations. The way it stands now is a big pillar of governance is the process of bulletins and bulletin iteration. So that's from the EP side, how governance is conducted. And we got to see a great example of that with Bulletin 2202. We published one version, got a round of feedback, published another version, got another round of feedback, and kind of having community calls and iterating with the community until we've reached a compromise that can kind of be agreed upon by everybody. And the other component to community governance is the governance portal. That's what we call it, which is just the echelon.io/governance. And that's where Prime holders can pay to Prime to submit a governance proposal. We haven't seen much in the way of that this year, and potentially that could be another area where we could maybe improve some UI UX stuff in the coming year to make that maybe a little bit more intuitive and have it update more quickly and stuff like that. But that's where, as a community member, if you have a strong feeling about something and want to seek feedback, by paying that to Prime, your proposal can potentially go to a token vote for the broad community. And if it gets, we have all the quorum tiers and requirements and stuff are set out in our Git book, which is in links if you want to kind of look through in more detail. But yeah, so those are kind of like the two pillars to governance, and throughout both of those, we are seeking to get community feedback along the way.
I think this is an ever-evolving process too, right? As new things come up, EPs should be adjusting and responding to those things. So it's a lot of responsibility. It's also, it is hard to manage and navigate the conflicts of interests, and we just try to do as much as possible, have rules that help to do that and ensure that happens, like these trade ban kind of timelines when new products or something comes to market. But it's not cut and dry, and there's always room for improvement. So I think every one of the EPs who take a seat in 2023 on the foundation have the responsibility of obviously ensuring that only gets better as we go forward, and kind of ensuring that they park some of their buys at the door so that they walk in with the Prime holders and networks interest in mind. We are over time, so do we want any other questions here, or do we have any other questions before we wrap it up?
I did see a comment in voice text from Zero, and it touches on what Rarity said, and it's actually kind of related to this governance component. But Zero is basically saying that this concept of a homogeneous public-facing opinion from EPs makes it hard. At least he's saying that makes it hard for him as a voter to kind of know who to vote for, because there's no real insight into the opinions of individual EPs. I said this before, but maybe I'll reiterate a bit, is that we value each other's opinions to the extent where when we have a contentious argument, so far, we've been able to find middle ground. I think that as the ecosystem evolves, more EPs come in from different groups, broader perspectives, etc. We absolutely might get to a fork in the road where there are opinions that are strongly held that are different from each other. And that is why we have these rules. For example, the rule of 3. And when we vote with our EP NFTs on Snapshot, we are representing our opinion. At no point when we've made those votes has anybody been told that they have to vote a certain way. We've just been able to reach consensus. So but that's not to say that in the future, or maybe even by the end of this term, there will be a vote where some EPs are voting against, while others are voting for, and I think that's totally fine, and that's part of the process. But when all is said and done, we have been able to reach these levels of consensus. And
There also really isn't a
Yeah.
muzzle on anybody from saying, I disagree with this publicly, right? Like if someone wanted to do that and say, hey, this is a vote that passed, I disagree with it, I was on the other side of it, they're welcome to do that. There's that doesn't, as long as no sensitive information is divulged beyond what was communicated from Echelon, like that, no one's prevented from doing that. I think it just comes down to all of us have quite a lot of respect for one another and our domains, and we turn to each other regularly for helping make some of these decisions. And I'm notorious for saying I'm really bad at certain things. And I look to people who have much more DeFi experience around those topics, and I really lean on them on those topics, and maybe they lean on me for other topics. And we have had heated debates around things, around what's right, what's wrong, why it should be certain ways. But it just always ends up being resolved before it becomes public facing in some capacity, even if someone's not super happy with the decision, which I've been on, the side. I'm sure every one of us have been on the side of one decision where we're not super satisfied with how it went. At the end of the day, we think, okay, well, did we make progress in the collective target of moving forward? Yes. Then I can live with this one, knowing that the other three that I wanted to push forward also have support. So it's kind of a process like that. But there is nothing preventing people from debating an open forum if they wanted to.
Cool. Well, yeah, we're at an hour and 15 here. I don't see any other hands up. Please have a read through the forum posts if you have questions on the election, and if they don't answer your questions there, hit me up or hit any of the other EPs up. We're happy to chat. But yeah, super excited for this process. I think it's going to be a lot of fun running the panels next month, and I'm really excited to see who puts their name in the hat. So thanks for coming, everybody, and we'll see you in the panels and in the polls.
Thanks, everyone.
See y'all.
And great questions.
See ya.